morning, everyone. Thank you for everyone that signed up for today's webinar. We understand that time is limited, so your attendance is super appreciated. We see a few familiar faces as well, some new ones. So, we're really looking forward to having an open discussion today. Today's webinar will be the first of an ongoing series of webinars, really focusing on a variety of sustainability topics, considering that the deadline for CDP is September of this year. We thought doing a webinar focused on CDP is timely, in that many companies are really just now starting up the process of preparing their disclosure. Quick round of introductions. My name is Albert Chung. I'm a principal at GSI, and I'll be moderating while leaving all of the technical aspects of the webinar to my two great colleagues, Dr. Becky Tui and Carmen Twitchell, who really lead and maintain our CDP service. This webinar is really geared towards first-time disclosures, but again, if there's any repeat disclosures on the call, please don't hesitate to ask questions, regardless of how specific it is, and we'll address those at the end of the call. The agenda will really focus on giving you all a sense of what CDP is, why it's important to companies, and how you can really go about efficiently streamlining your disclosure while not sacrificing quality or accuracy. We'll start off with the what, why, and how, and then really end it with a variety of tricks and tips in a time period at the end to address some of these Q&As. Regarding the questions that do come up, please use the Q&A function in the Zoom to submit questions anytime during the webinar. With that said, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Dr. Becky Tui, to start.
Great. Thanks, Albert. So to get us started, what is CDP? You're here joining the webinar, so you're exposed to it. Maybe you're being asked for a CDP disclosure. So what is CDP? CDP is a global nonprofit that runs the world's only independent environmental disclosure system for companies, capital markets, cities, states, and regions to manage their environmental data. And I put these numbers up because they speak to the reach of CDP. So last year in 2025, over 640 capital market signatories requested over 31,500 companies disclosed to CDP. And over 6.4 trillion of combined purchasing power among 270 major buyers asked their suppliers to disclose through CDP in 2025. That's a lot. And so these requests resulted in over 22,100 companies reporting to CDP. So these numbers are from CDP. And that is more than half the global market disclosing to CDP. And let's not forget that there are some 1,000 plus cities, states, and regions also disclosing through CDP. And that was last year. Next slide. So this increase in disclosures across regions of the world shows that environmental disclosure is becoming a global market norm. So here I took a snapshot of a few market indices to show how prevalent CDP disclosures are. So for example, looking at the S&P 500, 86% of companies within this index report to CDP's climate module. 14% report to the forest module and 41% disclosed to the water module. And many companies operating in regions are also anticipating mandatory climate disclosures. So this includes Asia, UK, Europe. And voluntary disclosure through CDP allows these companies to gain a competitive advantage. It lets them position themselves ahead of those mandatory regulations. It's ahead of the trend because CDP assigns scores. Next slide, please. Thanks, Albert. So before we get into the scoring, I still want to focus on CDP's history, how we got to where we are today, because it's changed a lot over the years in terms of its questions and its role. And so I wanted to give a quick summary for the rest of the presentation. So CDP was originally known as the Carbon Disclosure Project. It was founded in 2000 to create a standardized way for investors to understand how companies manage climate risk. It started with a simple idea. Institutional investors would ask companies to disclose greenhouse gas emissions and climate strategy. So they were trying to create transparency where there really was none. Throughout the 2000s, it became the de facto global platform for voluntary climate disclosure, with thousands of companies responding annually. It later expanded beyond climate to include water security and deforestation, reflecting these broader environmental risks across the value chain. And over time, the CDP questionnaire also evolved from just emissions reporting to include assessments of governance, risk management, strategy, and targets, aligning with frameworks like TCFD or the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And I'd say this is when the scoring system became a key market signal for investors and procurement teams as well. So today, CDP sits at the intersection of voluntary disclosure and regulatory alignment. And I will say that they've made a big effort to harmonize with standards like the IFRS S2 and CSRD. And we've seen CDP become a benchmarking tool and a practical on-ramp for mandatory climate and environmental reporting. So next slide. Thanks, Albert. So here you can see that both the total number of CDP disclosures and that the CDP is expanding topics. So initially, like I was saying, CDP just included climate, water, and forest questions. And then in 2022, it introduced biodiversity specific questions within the forest and climate questionnaires. Then in 2023, CDP significantly expanded the biodiversity content across the questionnaires, aligning closely with, again, emerging frameworks like Task Force on Nature-related financial disclosures and the GRI biodiversity standard. So I don't have the data here, but in 2024, CDP released its inaugural corporate disclosure its integrated corporate disclosure where biodiversity is embedded across themes now rather than treated as a standalone module. So basically with this figure, I want you to see that CDP is gaining both in terms of total disclosures and the scope of its disclosure, which really tracks with what users of CDP data want as well. Next slide. Thanks. Okay, so shifting gears a bit, a company discloses to CDP and gets a grade based on the CDP scoring methodology. But do grades matter? It really depends on why a company is disclosing. And we work with lots of different types of companies with lots of different reasons for submitting to CDP. And so this question of does the grades matter is really important because CDP grades convey a lot of information to a range of stakeholders. So who's asking for it? So CDP grades, first and foremost, they translate a lot of complex information into a clear signal, right? It converts hundreds of data points into a standardized score, which enables a quick comparison across companies, sectors, and geographies. So CDP grades also can influence capital, and the CDP grades are used by many investors where the CDP score informs how market assets or how the market assesses environmental risk and in some cases the cost of capital. CDP grades increasingly impact customer and supply chains. I think this is a big one. Large companies use CDP to evaluate suppliers, and a strong CDP score can win business, whereas a weak or missing scores can put that relationship at risk. We talked about this one already. CDP signals can signal regulatory and assurance readiness, right? Because CDP's worked very hard to harmonize and align with TCFD, IFRS, CSRD, ESRS, right? So a strong CDP for performance often reflects the company's preparedness for regulatory scrutiny and assurance. CDPs can drive internal discipline and governance, right? It's a year-over-year performance tracking, and that requires or reinforces oversight, risk management, and targets, right? So it can really drive that internal discipline and governance. We've worked with a lot of companies help integrate those processes as a result of CDP. So let's see. The CDP also carries reputational and strategic value, right? Carmen's going to talk a little bit about what an A-lister entails. But your CDP grade and getting those leadership scores really provides credible proof, validation that you have environmental leadership. And then sometimes um, the completion of a CDP disclosure and a grade really can tie to executive compensation. So all of these other reasons, right? For whatever reason, the having a good CDP grade is rewarded internally. Okay, so if I'm a company needing to make decisions about sourcing and ensuring my suppliers are supporting my environmental goals, for example, how am I going to compare and make decisions? So I'm gonna be looking at CDP grades, right? And so what do different grades mean? So here we have a C, a B, and an A. So a C grade, right, that signals awareness. It shows that you as a company, you understand the issue. Some risks are identified, they're mostly descriptive at this point. There's some basic governance in place. Metrics and targets may exist, but they are probably incomplete or aspirational. And there's limited links between environmental risks and strategy or financial decisions. So a C grade, right, that signals awareness. We understand the issue, but it has not yet been operationalized. Versus a B grade shows management. We manage the issue. So if a company is getting a B, they have clear governance, roles, and accountability. There's a formal risk process and policies in place. Targets are tracked and integrated into operations. And there's evidence, this is important, there's evidence that the company is using some kind of environmental risk management or planning processes that these risks are managed and they are influencing decision making. So again, a B signals management, that we are managing environmental risks and that these managing environmental risks, they have a business function. And then an A grade, right? That leadership level, right? That is the gold standard. If you have an A, you are leading the issue, right? So A-listers, they have um, climate, environmental risks, and they're demonstrating that these topics are fully embedded into the company's business strategy. They have science-aligned targets with measurable outcomes. They've completed a scenario analysis and have demonstrated that that scenario analysis informs their business strategy. They also have an active value chain engagement with throughout their value chain related to these environmental topics, and that they are externally leading and engaging in the broader society business environment on these topics. So again, if you're an A-lister, you're using these environmental insights to drive strategy and more recently to influence others. So the most important and often understood difference is that is the jump from a C to a B to an A. Next slide, please. And improving your grade is not just about better writing. It's about maturing in evidence. So the myth that longer answers improve grades. In fact, it's actually that grades improve with maturity and evidence. So what CDP is really asking as you jump from a C to a B is, do you systematically manage these risks? They've been identified, you have awareness at the C level, but B is you're managing them. So you have to demonstrate that. And then from a B to an A, does this does understanding and managing these risks meaningfully change how you run your business, and can you prove it? So CDP assessors, when they're grading and evaluating your disclosures, they're trained to look for evidence. Many companies get stuck at the B level, and there's a few reasons why companies kind of plateau out at a B. Um, so I'm going to run through some of those reasons. So the strategy discussions aren't documented. Sometimes um, a company has, right, informal planning sessions and discussions around it, but there's no actual documentation. Scenario results don't clearly affect decisions, right? You kind of need a causation to demonstrate that causation. Targets exist, but lack external credibility. So this means getting your targets validated, and that and then so moving from a B to an A, right? It's resolving some of these issues around formalizing how management influences strategy. Uh, and it's really, sometimes it comes down to organizational change, right? And that's not something that you can just change or that you can just improve with better writing, right? You actually have to go through that organizational change rather than like refining your report. So, bottom line here is that if you're getting a C, you have awareness and you acknowledge your environmental topics. If you're at a B, you have a structured management and integration of these topics. And really, an A is you've got strategic leadership with demonstrated outcomes. Really, again, CDP is these scores reflect how deeply environmental risks are embedded into a company's governance strategy and execution.
Thank you, Becky. That was a great explanation of what is CDP. I think it's clear that CDP really plays a significant role in sustainability disclosures, and it's really constantly expanding and evolving to fit the needs of industry and regulators. Next, Becky, we'll go into the discussion of how of CDP. Actually, I'm sorry. I think it's actually Carmen that will go into the discussion of how of CDP. So, with that being said, Carmen.
Thanks, Albert. There are a few important things to know when disclosing for the first time as a corporation. First, while you only fill out one questionnaire in the CDP portal, you can receive up to three environmental specific issue scores: a climate change score, a water security score, and a forest score. Eligibility for these environmental issues depends on industry sectors. Your industry sector also drives which questionnaire you fill out. Sectors are determined by CDP's activity classification system at the questionnaire setup and impact what questions you see, some elements of scoring, and how impactful certain category weights are in your final scores. Once you finish the disclosure, you will have the option to disclose either publicly or privately. Many first-time disclosers choose to disclose privately, so their score does not show up on the CDP website. Public versus private doesn't necessarily impact your score, but a public disclosure is required for an A. Small and medium enterprises, as defined by CDP in 2025 as less than 500 employees, or, and less than $50 million in revenue, can elect to fill out a condensed questionnaire. The SME disclosure has its own set of scoring criteria, and as of 2026, will touch on climate, forests, and water. Next slide. The CDP disclosure itself is broken up into 13 modules that broadly group questions based on types of information collected. Modules 1 through 6 and 13 in blue are agnostic of environmental issues and cover topics like risks and opportunities and business strategy. The move towards integrated modules in 2024 forced more alignment and broader management across companies. These modules are scored over different criteria for each: climate change, water security, and forests. Modules 7 through 9 and 12 in orange are environmental issue specific modules and will be scored only once. Modules 10 and 11 in gray are voluntary unscored modules. Oceans will join plastics and biodiversity as an opt-in module this year. Next slide. Where modules separate questions based on the type of information collected, CDP breaks up the scored questions into scoring categories. Each scoring category will receive a letter grade in addition to the final letter grade over each disclosure. Scoring categories are weighted depending on sector and place emphasis on certain topics. The scoring categories on screen are for the general climate change disclosure in 2025. Targets have been the highest weight at 14% for the last 5 years, highlighting the collaboration between CDP and the Science Based Targets Initiative and the importance that CDP places on target setting. Aside from the 2023 to 2024 integration exercise by CDP that redefined many of these categories, there's not much historical variation in these category weights. Next slide. When it comes to questions, there are some simple yes, no, or no, but we plan to in the next 2 years. Others, like question 2.2, will have cascading impacts. The way you answer 2.2 will determine if further questions open up, which is common for CDP. What makes question 2.2 particularly tricky is while it lives in the risks and opportunities identification, assessment, and management module, module 2, it has scoring implications for questions in the disclosures of risks and opportunities module, module 3, and the business strategy module, module 5. The way in which you answer 2.2 and all related questions could cap your score at a B, or alternatively, open up leadership points for an A. Question 5.11 is tricky for different reasons. This question was highlighted because it often trips companies up who are not expecting to answer questions related to their value chain. All companies, regardless of industry sector, are asked to respond on their level of engagement with various stakeholders on environmental topics. Subsequent questions ask for assessment methods, prioritization, and supplier requirements. This question set is an example of how CDP can distinguish between A, B, and C-level companies. A C-level company may demonstrate that engagement exists, typically with scope, coverage, prioritization logic, or a concrete activity selected. A B-level company will demonstrate that engagement is being used as a managed program with thresholds, requirements, actions, monitoring, compliance, or measurable outcomes. An A-level company will demonstrate a stronger ambition or scale, usually broader coverage and more rigorous supplier and customer requirements or higher performing engagement outcomes. Next slide. Module 7, the climate change module, is where most of the quantitative questions live. Roughly 40% of your climate score is determined by how you answer Module 7 alone. Questions 7.1 through 7.9 ask about your final greenhouse gas inventory and verification. The following 58 questions ask you to identify points of change and demonstrate ownership and understanding of energy and emissions metrics and targets. While the process of creating a greenhouse gas inventory will cover many of these questions, it's important to be prepared for analytical questions like 7.10.1 that ask you to justify change.
Good. Thanks, Carmen. Hopefully that gives everyone, just a feel for the types of questions CDP asks, really depending on the module. You can easily be looking over 100 questions, and Carmen only showed a few examples, but you'll notice that a lot of the questions follow similar patterns, which helps make the process more manageable once you get into it. With that, I'll hand it back to Carmen to walk you through how CDP scoring actually works, and how the responses that you put in your disclosure really translate into a score. So, Carmen?
Thanks, Albert. CDP grades on 4 levels: disclosure, awareness, management, and leadership. Each question earns points based on response according to criteria CDP publishes in each of the 4 levels. For most questions, if you miss a criteria, you're not eligible for points at the next highest level. For example, indicating that your environmental policy has organization-wide coverage is required to earn full awareness points in question 4.6.1. If any other option is selected under coverage, points will be lost and you will not be able to earn management points regardless of the policy content. Note that not all questions are scored all the way up to leadership. Some are simple yes/nos, graded only at the disclosure and awareness level. Next. Your final score is the sum of all question scores with management and leadership points weighted according to the scoring category weights we discussed earlier. These letter grades act like gates. For example, if you earn enough disclosure and awareness points, you'll pass from that C range and into that B range. But earning points isn't enough. Previously, there was an additional set of requirements called the essential criteria that applied exclusively to that leadership, that A and A minus band, and placed extra weight on certain question sets to determine if you deserved an A. In 2024, the essential criteria was expanded to cover all of the letter bands and essentially set locks on these gates to make sure that companies' grades reflected critical pieces of information. Earning that A, that equivalent of full marks, is highly coveted and demonstrates true climate leadership. In 2025, only 4% of companies achieved this distinction. Of those 877 companies, only 23 received a triple A, meaning an A in each climate change, water security, and forest disclosures. A company that qualifies for the A list in any disclosure demonstrates transparency beyond verified action and links climate metrics to strategic business values. Companies on the A list are widely regarded as industry leaders. I will say that while it's not impossible to receive an A on your first year of disclosing, it is very unlikely. More often, we see companies land in the high C, low B range in their first year of disclosing. CDP is constantly moving the finish line to push for continuous improvement and to ensure that climate leaders remain climate leaders. I'll be the first one to admit that the CDP portal is not the easiest dashboard to navigate. Those of you that have disclosed before may remember the 2024 disclosure cycle when the integrated questionnaire first came out and how frequent the portal would crash. The portal has gotten much more stable since then, and CDP is continuing to work to make the portal easier to use with enhanced data ingestion capabilities and an integrated AI assistant to direct response writing coming in the 2026 disclosure cycle. This year's disclosure cycle will continue to allow to opt in to non-scored topics like biodiversity and plastics, and will expand to include questions on ocean-related topics. In response to feedback from investors, financial institutions, corporate buyers, and policymakers, the 2026 questionnaire will give organizations the option to disclose how they are addressing adaptation and resilience in their risk and opportunity assessments, governance, strategy, financial planning, and engagement activities. The disclosure is being updated to align with the GRI 303 water and effluent standards, and GRI is the most widely used voluntary sustainability disclosure standard. And the Greenhouse Gas Protocol Land Sector and Removals guidance, published in January of this year, it is the first comprehensive global framework for the land sector. Note that because of the recent publication date, CDP does not expect organizations to report quantitative land data this year. And finally, this year's small and medium enterprise questionnaire will include forest and water metrics. However, SMEs will not be scored on all of these topics yet. Also new this year, the small and medium enterprises will now be able to receive A's, which they were not eligible for in years past.
Good. Thanks, Carmen. A lot of moving pieces to how CDP comes up with the grade, but it seems like based on my experience, there's a few ways we can really go about maximizing the points earned by how questions are answered. Carmen, again, we'll go next into these strategies in the next section. So, Carmen, if you will.
Sure, yeah. There are some easy ways to boost your disclosure, regardless of this is if if this is your first time disclosing or not. A select few of those qualitative questions require specific aspects of the response, but it is a good practice to use the situation, task, action, review, the STAR method to answer written questions. It's always so unfortunate to see points lost because while the response was well written, it never actually answered the question. Quantitative questions tend to be more straightforward with what they require, but every year I see points lost simply because the total in one question doesn't match the total in a following question. So don't forget to check for consistency between questions before you submit.
Okay, so I wanted to add a few tips and tricks into what Carmen just said about checking your numbers and the STAR method. So, a few things that we've found kind of help make the process run more smoothly. First is making sure you have the right people included from day one. Oftentimes it is pulling together, like those of you who we've worked with for other types of disclosures, you know, there's a lot of a lot of people, a lot of subject matter experts that need to come together to put together one of these climate related disclosures. And so it's level setting that people are going to need to provide you information. And sometimes that means educating them on why you're doing it. And so sometimes it's having a 10-minute breakdown of this is why we're submitting to CDP. This is why it's important. This is why you need to care. What's in it for me? So level setting on day one with who needs to be providing information and why they're doing it. Also, aligning on, again, does a grade matter or are we just meeting a key customer's expectations, right? So again, level setting with your key internal stakeholders. Um, so second point here, setting a schedule. So that's part of the reason why we're doing this webinar now is because having a few months runway is really good, right? Getting into that situation where you're checking your scores the night before it's due and the portal's acting up. It's awful. It is very stressful and awful, and Carmen's smiling because it really is stressful for everybody. And we want to make it as smooth as possible. So that means giving yourself at least a week before it's due to do your final checks and make sure the portal's operating. So we usually, how long does it usually take to put a CDP schedule together or CDP submission together? It depends if it's your first time doing it, how streamlined the information is coming to you, what those conversations looked like with your subject matter experts that are getting you that information. If you want to try to improve your grade, right? If you're going to try to identify those near-term corrective actions and troubleshoot them, right? So understanding what that schedule looks like. And then lastly, CDP likes to update the methodology mid-cycle. Again, Carmen's laughing here because they do, right? And so one of the things that we do, and I encourage you to do as a first-time disclosure, is to not download their guidance, right? But just have a link to it on your browser because they might upload the guidance and you don't know you're working off of last week's materials. Right. And so that's something that we do. We actually, it is very discouraged to download anything from CDP, right? So we want to be pulling the latest every day that we're working in CDP. Um, let's see. So looking at the 2026 disclosure cycle, I'm going to pass it back to Carbon because these are the key dates moving forward that you should be paying attention to and thinking about with your schedule and how you're going to loop in these internal subject matter experts.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking at specific dates, the 2026 questionnaire guidance and scoring materials will drop in the next few weeks. GSI will be publishing a blog, so look out for that to see what's new and what's changed since 2025. This year, the scoring window runs from mid-June to mid-September, which is the same as 2025, and you should expect to have the results of your CDP disclosure by the end of November.
So we're almost at the end. So shameless plug, how can we help you get um, get your first CDP submission in, or maybe it's the second or third year you're doing it. We can help in a few ways. What we ultimately want to do is understand why you're submitting to CDP and then take out the surprise from the score. So um, we like to do some capacity building around, again, so with those subject matter experts, why we're doing it, what you're being asked, or why you're being asked to submit, what the key issues are for those stakeholders who are asking. Maybe they just care about part of the module. Maybe they don't care about the grade itself, but they want to see that that you have your climate risks identified, right? If you have that conversation with those stakeholders that are asking, we can help curate and work in the whole questionnaire accordingly. So the disclosure prep, we can manage the process, or we can support whoever the lucky person is in your company who's going to be doing it themselves. Mock scoring, that goes into taking the surprise out of the score. It is very helpful to complete the questionnaire once, to the best of your ability, and then have either Carmen or I go through with the latest CDP scoring methodology and identify, right, and what will your grade be based on your current status, and then what are your near-term corrective actions that you could easily resolve in this disclosure cycle, right? So if it's making sure that you write your questions better, right? Or it's your numbers aren't adding up. Those two things that Carmen said are really important a few slides back. So we can go through and mock score it. And then we can also help improve the grade, right? And so sometimes there's near-term grade improvements, and sometimes it's a longer-term grade improvement. And again, why are you disclosing to CDP? Sometimes that stakeholder who's asking is okay, knowing that you have a long-term plan to resolve these pieces of the CDP questionnaire, right? But again, having insight into that and being able to have that conversation, how important are these certain things in the near term versus long term is really important. And then also being able to communicate that up to your leadership, however you're going to get the resources and time to resolve those corrective actions. So those are really important pieces that we can help with. And with that, we are going to pause. We've been talking a lot, and we'd love for you to put your questions in the chat. There's the chat feature. There should be the chat feature, and we can see your questions. And while people are putting questions in, I'm going to open up the Q&A and actually ask Carmen to, you mentioned the portal itself can be not the most fun experience. Can you walk through what a first-time disclosure would anticipate? Like if you're setting up your CDP portal, what does that process look like? Do I have to download anything? Can you speak to that?
Sure, yeah. If you've worked with me at all, you'll know that CDP is a very love-hate relationship with me, and that includes the portal. When you first open up the portal for a first-time disclosure, you'll see the setup page. That's where you enter all the information about your company, the size, if you want to disclose to water, forests, or climate change. You can indicate if you're a member of the RE100, and CDP will use all of that information to determine which questionnaire you fill out. When you get into the questionnaire itself, the questions are grouped by module. You can pick anywhere to start. I usually recommend, well, I will recommend starting at module 1 and working through chronologically, just because, as I mentioned before, some of those questions, how you answer the top question will determine if you see another question, or will determine some of the options that are available to you in the follow-up questions. When you're filling out questions, CDP has a progress indicator. It'll say not completed, in progress, or completed. I will say you can submit an incomplete questionnaire, but it really is not in your best interest to do so. You'll notice we never talked about a D, but it showed up on some of the slides. A D, you receive a D when you submit an incomplete questionnaire. I like to say it's the equivalent of writing your name on the paper and turning it in. Please don't do that.
Carmen, that's a good point. So, can you speak to what a full submission looks like? So when you say fill in and can put forward a complete questionnaire, what does that mean? What's the thing that most happens when people are surprised?
That would be so it really is in your best interest to write something down in any of the box, every single one of the boxes. If it's a placeholder zero, and then you explain, hey, this is zero because we haven't measured this yet. Or if it's a this is not applicable to us, make sure you clarify that. The CDP, it operates as truly a questionnaire. When you see the questions, you'll see drop-down boxes, you'll see places to enter text, you'll see places to enter numbers. Um, in terms of filling out the boxes, it's fairly straightforward, but there's a lot of boxes, so it sometimes can get a little overwhelming.
So even if it's something that you don't have or it's a zero, you still need to answer it.
Yes, and
Because
that's
that
one of the
gets
most common
scored. Yeah,
cases.
so that gets scored for awareness, right? Or it might be a zero, but you're showing that you are aware that it's a zero.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct.
Okay. So, okay, we've got a question here. How much data do you need before it's worth reporting? And how much estimation uncertainty is allowed versus direct measurement?
Do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, I will just first off say how much data do you need before it's worth reporting? If you're being asked to disclose to CDP, um, I think first off, it's how important is it that we get that data, right? So the internal case of we need to get this, building the internal case, we need to get this data. And then Carmen, I'll let you answer the rest.
I mean, you really it depends, like Becky said, it depends on the motivation. If you're being asked any amount of data is enough data to report. Um, one of the sad things to see is a do not disclose or a D because you answered some of the questions, but not all. If you're doing it voluntarily, I'd say have at least a greenhouse gas inventory and have communicated some sort of climate, water, or forest related metrics within your own company, and then you can go ahead and submit to CDP.
Yeah. We have worked with a company that was putting together their inaugural greenhouse gas inventory at the same time that they were doing their first CDP submission. And that was actually a really interesting project. I thought it was going to be a lot more stressful than it was actually. But because we had the CDP organization for that person to be navigating their first greenhouse gas inventory internally, it actually worked out pretty well.
And I will say you can always select privately disclosed. So it will indicate your score won't show up on the CDP portal, but it will indicate to whoever is asking you to respond, the score will be communicated to them, but not to the public.
And how often can you do that though?
You can do that, I believe, your first and second year, and then you'll be required to do public.
Yeah, yeah, because it's changed. Um, and a lot of companies do often do their first and second year disclosures privately. Okay, so we've got another question here. How long does it take a first-time preparer to complete a CDP report? Are outside consultants typically needed for the first time? So, how long does it take for the first time preparer to complete CDP reporting? So, do they have an inventory? We were kind of talking about this. So, assuming you have some kind of inventory, and you have your one person identified internally, like I'm going to be leading the CDP effort. It takes, I'd say, 2 or 3 months just to wrangle all your internal stakeholders. And of course, you can do it by yourself. That's often when we get brought in because the grade, to be honest, the grade is not what they were expecting. Because there are a lot of tricks, like we were saying, like always fill out, even if it's zero, fill it out. Um, for using the star method, there's a lot of those little tricks that you can fill it out. But you might not know. And that's part of why we're doing this webinar too, is just to share some of that knowledge. And again, why are you doing it? Like if it's just to fill it out, just fill it out. That's fine. If it's to meet a stakeholder request or expectations, you might want to bring in an outside consultant.
I'll just add one thing to that. For a first-time preparer, the motivation behind and the expectations behind your first year is really key. I've seen companies use their first year as kind of a level setting platform,
Mm,
and just see, hey, where are we doing well? Where are we doing poorly? Not caring so much about communicating the external grade, but using it more of as an internal exercise of how are we doing? What sustainability topics do we know about? What don't we know about? That sort of activity.
yeah. Okay, we've got another question. When is it worth disclosing on water and forest? Is it viewed as negative to only report on climate?
I can,
So, Carmen, why don't you take this one?
yeah, I can take this one. If you believe that your water and forest, um, if you're being asked to report on water and forests, then it's important to disclose. More often than not, I see companies only reporting on climate. That may be because water and forests aren't necessarily important to their business or relevant to their operational procedures, or that's just topics that they haven't expanded into or incorporated into their sustainability scope quite yet. Um, it's
Yeah.
not uncommon to only report on climate, and I wouldn't say that that's necessarily negative, but it is considered more positive to report on more topics, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's a good, it makes me think of a question we get, like how much uncertainty is acceptable for a first time disclosure? Uh, and and I think that was similar to the first question of how much data do you need? So how much uncertainty? And I guess that, it could be uncertainty with the score, or it could be uncertainty with the data. How have you worked with clients dealing with uncertainty?
Again, I feel like a little bit of a broken record here, but it really depends on the motivation for why you are disclosing, who's asking for it, and who's going to see it in the end. I think that some level of uncertainty isn't necessarily bad. There is an option of yes, when you have those multiple choice options, they provide you an option to say no, but we plan to in the next 2 years for a reason. CDP understands that not all companies have capacity, and that CDP or that climate reporting really is a journey. Um, and so I guess it depends on how you're framing the disclosure to your audience, to the public. But I'd say that any level of uncertainty to a certain extent is fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I think we're almost up on time. There is one more question, so I think if maybe if we can answer this one last question pretty quickly, I think we'll be good to go and wrap it up. The question is, how much uplift is needed if our company already reports to TCFD or IFRS?
I love this question.
You want to take it, Becky?
Sure. So it's one of those things, right? In sustainability, we talk about the acronym SOUP, and it's been, they call it the Wild West, right? Because standards are changing and evolving so quickly, and CDP is not a standard, right? And they're very intentional about that. They do not want to be a standard, but they do align very well to the best that they can with global standards. And the global climate reporting world has really converged around IFRS. And, West TCFD got absorbed into IFRS. And so the CDP questionnaire actually really uh, almost line by line aligns with IFRS questions. And the thing that's fantastic about CDP is that they give you the scoring methodology, right? So whereas IFRS, it's sometimes nebulous. What do you mean by a company shall do XYZ things, right? It's in the standard, but CDP, they grade you on what that includes. And so companies that are, this speaks to why CDP is often an on-ramp for compliance, because if you're doing the best, if you're understanding your CDP questionnaire, your near-term corrective actions, and how you're going to advance your grade, really that is often setting you up very well for full compliance with any kind of jurisdiction mandating IFRS reporting. So if you already have, let's say you're a company in scope for California Senate Bill 261, and you've prepared a draft climate-related financial risk disclosure using TCFD, that actually still really sets you up well for CDP. There's um, a lot you can take from, say, example for your governance disclosure. What's the board's oversight of climate-related risk? There's almost like a line by line comparison where you can take that and export it into CDP. Carmen, has that been your experience?
Yeah, and one thing I didn't mention when I was talking about the portal itself is when you answer questions, you'll be able to see that guidance as you answer questions. I believe there's a little information tab. They might have changed it in the 2026 release. We'll see. But you can read that guidance as you fill out your questions.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great question. Very relevant for right now too.
Sounds good. Well, I think that does wrap it up. Thank you for everyone for attending, and thank you for the questions. I think to wrap up the webinar, if anybody wants a copy of the recording or the slides, I believe that is available upon request. But that being said, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.